Hey, everybody, welcome out to the AI Think Tank podcast. Today, we have an exciting episode centering around mycelium neural networks, AGI, and the human brain and actual intelligence. With me today, I have Jeanette Small. Jeanette is a clinical psychologist as well with a focus on somatic psychology, and she founded Lucid Cradle in Bend, Oregon, and she's one of the first licensed psilocybin therapists in Oregon. And it is a delight to have you. How are you doing? Welcome out.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you for such a warm welcome.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a lot to cover. And there's just been so much hype in the media and so many actual solid scientific discoveries in some cases, but a lot of wide open questions and a lot of wild ideas out there that have been floating around in this year and also like just very much recently with a lot of things that have been coming out with biological systems and electronics. And so you have a wonderful background to lead us into this because of your focus and your experiences. So tell us about yourself, and then we can start launching into this. So how did you begin this journey?
Oh goodness, when I was
Uh-huh.
born. But I will cut to the highlights of
Yeah.
what brought me here. So I studied, actually, I started with art. I really first became a professional artist, and my very first big brag-worthy experience was to exhibit with the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art when I was just 18. But then I kind of wussed out, and I didn't want to major in art. I was really scared of my, earning potential, and I went for an academic discipline. I completed my undergraduate degree in psychology at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And then I did my graduate work. I completed the master's and PhD program in clinical psychology with
Mm-hmm.
emphasis on somatic psychology at the Santa Barbara Graduate Institute. This is all a lot of word salad. So I want to share a little bit about why it is that I went into kind of an alternative program for graduate school. Um, Being in an undergraduate program, I have noticed that my assumption about what a psychologist does was not entirely accurate. I noticed that the PhD level folks, they're researchers. A PhD is a doctor of philosophy. These guys learn about manipulating data and collecting data and interpreting it.
Yeah.
That's not the same people who spend time sitting with people and actually listening to them and supporting them. So I wanted to go into a program that combined both of those elements because I felt like it was really important to check your work against real people. Like you have this theory. How does this apply when you're actually sitting with a person? So this is what brought me into the graduate program that I went into. And then I ended up working not deeply with people. I wanted to help. I really had this, what I call like a bleeding heart syndrome. So
Mm-hmm.
I ended up working more in social services. I worked with teenagers in crisis. I worked under a psychiatrist for a while who specialized in opioid addictions. I worked at a residential facility for adolescents and with families in crisis. So I really got to see kind of the gamut of human experience and what it's like to be feeling not well and for different reasons and to struggle with different things. So when psilocybin became a legal opportunity, so this just became a thing. We federally are still illegal, but Oregon was the first state in the United States to give us this legal window, this opportunity to work with clients using psilocybin containing mushrooms. So a psychedelic, a true kind of old school psychedelic that is mind opening and regressing and all of those wonderful things.
Mm-hmm.
I was so excited. This was an opportunity to combine a lot of the wisdom that I've collected over the years in my life. So I just dove right in. And as you've kindly mentioned, I was one of the first to receive my license. So I've been in business providing legal licensed services to clients in this network for just over a year.
Yeah. And you provide free services to veterans as
Yeah,
like
I
that. You do. Yeah.
yes, yeah. I have a thing for the population. I
Mhm.
tend to enjoy their company a lot.
Right.
So
Right. And so, we're involved in, just, the way we met is actually, through your husband, because we're part of Quai
Mhm.
AI, which is a very large organization now, a nonprofit that's, focused on, making it more personal, the access to AI and the compute and keeping it democratized, so to speak. It's a wild word to use for stuff like this, but it's true. And so there's so many angles today with artificial intelligence, and we have some good ground to cover. And your ground level, feeling and sensing and being there and holding space with people on these journeys is really testament to certain claims out there, but not all of them, as there's so many misconceptions underlying this. Two people can come to derive the same decision, but in different ways, and then they do the same thing, and it's could be drastically different. One person's biases and weights are different than another's, based on their experiences or and even physiology.
Mhm.
There are people that there have been instances where someone has a damaged part of their brain and they are able to retrain a different part to do the same things. And so there's all this flexibility and neuroplasticity, um, and just a lot of opportunity to explore what can happen and how we can heal and how we can grow and improve our lives and advance society as a whole as well. And I think it's important to, well, just bring up some commonalities here. Mushrooms have, in general, lately have been very popular in nootropic form and have come in a wide variety of types and for different reasons. And some, with obvious benefits, some that we've been eating, but a lot of them are medicinal and aren't exactly for flavor. And I'm lucky enough to be in a part of town here in the International District where I can go to special shops and have different mushrooms that are for medicine only, and then use that and experience those benefits and good well-being. And not drinking as much coffee is a wonderful side effect of that. So a lot of health benefits. But with everything that's going on, I mean, neural networks, what is that? And people talk about it and we throw the term around. So we're going to show that off here in a second. But essentially, when you get into a car to drive, a neural network is activated, and you just automatically, there's certain things you do, and you don't even have to think about it. Okay, or brushing your teeth, maybe even washing the dishes. There's just so many of them that we developed as a subroutine of what we do, and it just allows us to do more by doing less. It's like learning a formula. Instead of hand counting apples, you can learn a formula and then do multiplication. Okay. So we have that. So in neural networks in the brain, and then in neural networks in computing and AI systems, one came before the other, obviously, and that was actual intelligence. And so these neural networks that have been created and since the 1950s, and some research before that even, but in the 1950s is when this started, and it's a lot older than people think. So let's see here. So there's a common approach that your focus of therapy takes, which is to disrupt a neural network, that so someone that has a problem getting around or over something can reconnect in a different way with themselves. Is that a fair statement?
That's one way to look at it for sure.
Okay. Okay. All right. So with these networks, I'm going to share my screen here in a minute, and we're going to show the perceptron. But there is a popular database that we use when we're training systems that essentially it's for optical character recognition. And so it's the MNIST database. And so it's the Modified National Institute of Standards and Technology. And it's 70,000 grayscale images of numbers that have been hand drawn sloppily, neatly, whatever. But it's just white on black or black on white, as you can imagine, just some contrast. 70,000 of them are in grayscale. 60,000 have been picked for training, and then 10,000 have actually been used for testing. So they're like really difficult tests. And so during our stint at MIT, we were using gradient descent to train and watch these cycles come through the neural network, and it would get more efficient and more efficient at learning what was what, until finally it would reach a level of 98 or 99% efficiency or correctness, I should say, at the target. And so I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see if we can pull up the perceptron for everybody. Here we go. Turn this off. All right, here it goes. So Frank Rosenblatt in 1957 invented the perceptron. It's a single layer neural network that was the first machine to be able to have an original idea. Rosenblatt was a research psychologist and a project engineer at Cornell Aeronautical Laboratory in Buffalo, New York. So this, what you're seeing on my screen, is a 3D version of that. On the top left-hand corner, you'll see they're using that exact same data set I was mentioning, MNIST. And you can see that as it moves through, it is determining on the left side right there what you see on the digital end of those numbers that are clean and easy. That's the answer. On the right-hand side, what you're seeing right now is a hand-drawn representation that's been digitized. Okay. And so here we have a multi-layer one. So we're going to show this for a second. So neural networks are based on the human brain and its morphology and those neurons. And so these are just, it may seem magical and it works really well, but it takes a lot to do this. It's not as easy and as energy efficient as our physiology. In some cases, there are things that do line up, but in other cases, it doesn't translate directly, which is an important fact for today. It might look similar, but it's not quite the same. So Rosenblatt's inspiration came from the way neurons work in the brain, and his goal was to simulate brain principles in the perceptron. The perceptron's key feature includes learning. So it learns by adjusting its weights based on the error and its output compared to the desired output. And an activation function, the weighted sum of the inputs is passed through an activation function, typically a step function. Okay. And there's a threshold. If the sum exceeds a certain threshold, the perceptron outputs 1. Otherwise, it outputs 0. And so in these steps of refinement, you can see on the screen I'm sharing that there are different types of networks that one could choose to use with varying degrees of efficiency and accuracy, depending. If you're using limited architecture, something might work better than another. If you know that something's going to be within a given range of variability, you can choose a lesser system, maybe throw out hidden layers and have a more efficient for computing model. And then once you have that trained, then you can deploy it. And so the similarities between training models like this is much like what parallels in neurology with the human brain. Okay. So let's see here. What we're going to do now is take a look at mycelium, and we're going to watch how this slime mold connects to two pieces of oat through a maze. And so we talk about machine learning, we talk about neural networks. This right here is much like the gradient descent pattern we were just looking at in the perceptron. And here we just get a different view of it. And so as it has spread out, it figures out what the most direct path is, and then it trains itself, essentially, it tunes itself in. And look at that. So it's made it through the maze. And so what you're seeing on the right-hand side is oats. Those white bits are oats, and the middle is the beginning of the slime mold. And here it is connecting and figuring out the shortest routes between those oats, which are actually different nodes in Japan and around Tokyo for the subway network. So this was done well over a decade ago. And machine learning has been with us since the 50s, keep in mind. And so even our wireless technology that we use, what's called the AGI antenna, it's commonly used for a lot of different types of transmission and reception. It was constructed, it was actually the formula was created using machine learning, and it was much like this, where it figured it out on its own. And so that's the learning component that we're talking about today. And here, finally, you can see this on a tree. It's just beautiful. And so there's so many similarities with patterns in nature, but in that it's so important that we don't get caught up into projecting and trying to mirror all these things upon themselves, because they are limited. And we have to be careful with that. So let's see here. Also in mycelium, you have this term that's really beautiful called the wood wide web. And it's a term used to describe an underground network of fungi that connect the roots of trees and other plants in a forest ecosystem. This network of fungi, known as mycorrhiza, is important for the exchange of nutrients and other substances between plants. So there's a lot of beautiful similarities in the human body and throughout nature in ways these patterns come out. But again, we have to be careful. So let's take a look Jeanette, I'm gonna show this video while I pass the torch to you, and we move on to what is to be considered right now in terms of misconceptions for these weights and balances, and what we've been projecting in terms of a therapeutic approach and a scientific approach, a hard approach, and what data really isn't substantial, and how it's very difficult to substantiate it in certain ways through your
Thank you.
studies here.
So I'm gonna say right away, I'm gonna own my bias. A lot of my, ideas about this, they're really resting in the presuppositions that are in the somatic psychology realm, meaning that among many other things, we really don't think of human mind as being an equivalent of the human brain. We do consider the human to be a much more complex being. So we give credence to the processing of information that happens in other cells in the body, and perhaps in things that are not as easily observed. So perhaps it is an interaction with electromagnetic fields. Maybe it is an
Mhm.
interaction with chemical interactions that are less easily observed, or maybe they're easily observed, but we are just not weighing those as they should be. So all of human experience, or all of reality in general, is really overarching. It's a huge amount of data.
Mhm.
We're just showing us the processing of recognizing handwritten numbers and how complex the computations are for something that, on the grand scheme of things, is actually a relatively simple process, right?
Mhm.
Like, we do this pretty easily. We have this visual processing that happens in the background almost. We're also at the same time digesting, breathing, regulating our thermo homeostasis,
Mhm.
uh, and a host of other things. We're also tracking for potential dangers. Okay, if something happens, something of, suddenly fell in the background, this will draw my attention. If I heard somebody screaming, this will light up different parts of my brain. So we tend to look at patterns and aggregate them, look at averages, and then we go, this is how it works, when in fact it is really just a very small subset of the actual experience. So there is a lot of cherry picking of data,
Mhm.
a lot of confirmation bias that we're seeking here for ourselves, because in fact, while we're seeing a lot of overlap with neurological function from a human or a mammal, with, let's say, the way that some fungi behave, we can also actually see different solutions to the same problems. Okay, like an octopus or like a mollusk in general might process information very differently and come up with very similar results. So I think we need to remember that what we know is really just a very small part of the whole,
Mhm.
and by averaging a lot of the data, we can find a small subset of it that can make certain predictions, but it
Mhm.
really is just a small subset. So the closer our parameter is set, the tighter the parameter is, the better we are at creating a system that is in fact reliable. Okay, we get the correct answer a lot more often. But the more data points that we have to consider with a factor analysis, with every additional factor, we're increasing the chances of being wrong exponentially.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So this is
Mhm.
not, like, mathematically, that's a big deal,
Yeah.
if we're suddenly considering more than, hey, how do I get from here to this oat piece over there? Okay,
Mhm.
the slime molds and us and maybe the rats and maybe the mollusks will kind of find similar solutions. But what
Mhm.
if we say, okay, but here's this kind of oats, and over here you have a different kind of oats, and over there you have rye, and here you
Right.
have wheat, and also you have a competing fungus,
Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah.
have another, consideration for social functioning.
Mhm.
Okay, these are not even a ton of data points. We consider those all the time. We process this plethora of data. So
Yeah.
what is it that we really weigh?
Um,
The more complex the system, the
mhm.
more there's room for error, and that error is not negligible.
Right. Imagine, you just sparked an idea in my head, which is, Imagine other neural networks in someone's head that are disruptive taking over other neural networks that would normally be beneficial. And this is just like the competing
Mhm.
slime molds here. I mean, this is very much the interplay between inner and outer in the ecosystems around us. So that and these are such important points because a lot of times it's we want to latch into something as if it's isomorphic, as if it's intermappable, and it looks so similar, but it's not. And the weights are drastically different. Like one thing is weighted on frequency. Okay, so radio, okay, you have amplitude modulation and you have frequency modulation. And one thing's based on the amplitude of the signal, one thing's based on what frequency you tune into, and then that amplitude is further boosted, however, for your volume. And so it'll look the same. Yeah, it's a radio wave going through space. Oh, yeah, it's an antenna. It's a trunk circuit underneath it, inducting that into a transistor that amplifies that signal for us to hear. However, the way that that's getting to us is drastically different. And then if you think, well, TV signals, it's just a stream, right? No, it's actually a multiplex signal that's been compressed and interlaced onto itself that decodes in your TV with digital, with audio and video. And it's not this linear stream, it's packets with its own form of error correction. Okay. And so if you don't know in file systems, and I'll just say it for people out there, and then I'll give this back to you, but error correction, let's say you forget something, okay? Or let's say you wrote on a piece of paper with a pencil, and that every once in a while you would erase something and keep writing on the paper, and you keep taking notes and you erase, and over time you start to wear out the paper until one day you erase something and you write, and all of a sudden it's actually not writing on anything, but the hardware and the software let it write. And as a digital forensic specialist, I've seen this, and this is my one of my expertise realms here. The same thing can happen with memory, okay, with brain damage, alcoholism, drug abuse, traumatic events. There's so many things and cases that I've read. I studied a lot of case studies, okay, leading up to this, and it was profound. It was really heartbreaking, even, but profound nonetheless. How powerful and moving these dynamics are in our life, and how quickly it can change, just like the wind, for some people, depending on how their internals are. And so weights and balances look the same to other people from the outside, aren't the same to an individual on the inside. And these are in the same systems, humans. But we look across nature for these similarities, and those isomorphic gaps become larger. But we want to hold to that. It looks human. We project this, faces and things, what have you. It's very natural. It's part of who we are. It's how we got here. But understanding it allows us to guide ourselves better. So back to where you're at in this, what are you seeing as, the biggest misconception and the actual one of the biggest known bridges that is real, that is legit and measurable? What are you seeing right now in terms of this in night and day?
Well, okay, so I'd like to add a little bit more to some of the things that you've just said, right?
Okay.
Like there is this a lot of times in literature, we're talking about, traumatic events, right? Like big things. I would like to draw our attention to the fact that actually this contextualization happens all the time. Like right now, we're talking, right? Like the context for me internally is changing ongoing. Okay. The hormonal load that I have, like, oh, I'm talking, okay, I'm releasing some norepinephrine in order to keep myself, speaking. And then I have to stop speaking. So now the norepinephrine is slowly decreasing. Okay. I had a lot of coffee to start
Oh
because I
yeah.
was smart and wasn't just taking, mushrooms. But, I will take a sip of coffee. Okay, that changes the hormonal households within me. The temperature changes. Oh, a thought came into my mind. Now that deeply impacts the, neurotransmitter availability in my brain. All of
Mhm.
that is constantly changing. Some of that I'm aware of. Like I can bring my awareness to it and I can say, well, of course, as the day goes on, I'm going to get hungrier, so I might get more reactive. Now I'm not paying attention as hard.
Right.
Oh, it was something distracting. Now I'm trying to, regulate things. And a lot of this, by far the majority of what is actually driving our felt sense and our behavior, appears to be not conscious. So, in the literature in psychology, like there's a lot of kind of bickering, or was at least, because this is depth psychology, about is this pre-conscious? Is it unconscious? Is it a collective unconscious? Is this something that all of the humans share? Is this, a completely separate thing, like Rene Descartes postulated way back then, before psychology existed.
Right.
Maybe there's a spirit. Maybe there's a spirit that is disembodied and that has its own agenda. Maybe there is a deity that comes and acts through us. So the amount of things that we don't know, they're ever present. And so for my work, I get asked a lot of times things like, okay, so your treatment, like, does that work for people who are depressed? And here is, the can of worms. Okay, what does it mean to be depressed? We can say, well, being depressed means you went to a therapist who has diagnosed you with depression. Okay, that's not entirely the same thing as I feel depressed, or what that means contextually to each individual person, or, like all of these words are very contextual.
Yeah.
So, what I am seeing in my work is this interplay of all of these unknowns. And again, we're aggregating everything, we're averaging a lot of the data
Yeah.
points, we're looking at certain predictive, things. And we go, well, it seems like, once we have this treatment and we have this experience, perhaps as a consequence of that experience, and we assign something to it, we go, must have been the mushrooms. The mushrooms change the way that the brain function goes. It
Mhm.
might as well have been the exposure to the rugs in my space.
Mhm.
Or it might have been the biochemical exchange with the one fig tree that I have, and that tree is like the most transcended being in the entire universe. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like
Yeah.
what we
Yeah.
assign value to, like, is a bias. It is a bias based on what we believe to be true.
Right.
And we see this through
Yeah.
time, like
Uh-huh.
100 years ago, we're like, oh, aliens don't exist. This can't possibly be because alien intelligence is a human from a different world that behaves like us and talks like us and does the same
Mhm.
thing. Now we're like, well, it's more like an information processing system that may or may not be biological. Okay, suddenly the conversation changed. And we're like, maybe
Yeah.
there's life on Mars. Okay, like, does it mean they're humans walking on Mars? Not likely. But the way that we conceptualize it has shifted. And with that, all of the meaning with it has
Mhm.
taken a turn.
It's the what is it? Etiology? How do
Yeah,
we know what we
we
know? I mean,
studied how we know what we know.
you don't know what you don't know, and that's why we look and keep studying. And you have the operational definitions that we were talking about the other day. I mean, this is, and for those who don't know, a lot of meetings go into this show. This is a lot of research, but to keep it together, I mean, I like to go back to what you were highlighting was continuous variables and how they get turned into discrete variables. It allows us for calculations, but at the expense of accuracy. And how do we rope back with that? How do we find something meaningful in that? Because you really have to limit the scope of the conditions and in the context of these tests and where you're getting it. And as to the data scientists out there who will be looking at this later, as well as I do, you have to clean your data, but cleanliness is not everything. You also have to have something meaningful in that, no matter what you're measuring. And even if you substantially eliminate any outliers, and let's say you do a really great job to 99.1%, whatever, you still have the application of it beyond the acquisition of the data. And that could greatly restructure it. Okay. So I'm gonna bring a little thing into this for everyone. My favorite example of what is counterintuitive is the formula for the total combination of positions for a Rubik's Cube. Okay. So the Rubik's Cube has, the six faces, and in the center of it, there's a cube that is stationary that doesn't move. Well, a long time ago, some mathematicians got together and determined what the overall permutation count is for the Rubik's Cube, like how many hundreds of thousands or millions of positions were there. And there was this great big number. Okay. Well, years later, it turned out to be challenged and found to be wrong because they didn't count the centers of each face as immovable and actually limiting it. They thought it would make it smaller, but in fact, by limiting and rearranging the formula, it massively expanded the permutation count to include the factual counted total, which was verified in computer systems. So that's a great humbling example of what looks to be one way and seems to be logically one way is in fact quite the opposite and is counterintuitive. And so therein lies the rub for us people in the field trying to clean the data, and much less, okay, how do you present this? How do you even go about studying it? So what are you seeing that works? What are you experiencing with your work?
I say that it's good to, as you just illustrated, the complexity of, what happens with a small tweak of a foundational assumption, like it is so vastly different. If I have a presupposition, it will color everything moving forward. And so what I'm learning, from working with people, from not just staying in the lab, crunching the numbers, is check your work. On occasion, just remember that everything that we're able to quantify is an approximation, and that approximation comes at a cost. Okay, so again, like going back to, let's say something relatively simple. Most of us are driving. Okay, we're driving cars. We get into a car, we have certain disposition towards it. Like, part of it is the type of vehicle that we're driving, the type of space that we're driving in, our personality. Okay, but then there is additional factors. So this is something that I think is very applicable, because we were promised self-driving vehicles. Okay,
Mhm.
there's been a lot of research, like how many data points do you really need, like how much more do you need to be on the road to really understand something that seems very predictable, right? We have like predictable rules. And then we're starting to see, oh, there's a ton of variability. This is
Yeah,
actually very
yeah.
difficult to calculate, because, this whole like, well, when someone is crossing the street in front of you, like, stop, don't run them over, becomes like, well, okay, so how do you conceptualize that actually? What
Mhm.
does that really mean? And how much computation goes into everything, and how much
Yeah.
nuance actually seems to make a huge difference. Things
Yes.
are these outliers. Okay,
Mm.
we're looking again, this
Yeah.
averaging. We can get it to good enough,
Mhm.
but then what happens when good enough is not good enough?
Yeah, yeah, the systems have exceptions. I mean, so for everybody out there, when you do pattern recognition or you do object edge border recognition or what is what with AI and you train systems to do this, there's a thing you can do that in red teaming and trying to hack these systems. You can put a white pixel in a very particular place in any photo, and it will make an apple a bicycle to the AI or something like really unrelated. Okay. And so you can imagine, the cars system is seeing someone walking a crosswalk. Well, there's a lot of parity at a crosswalk because you might have some lines that represent the crosswalk. There's some other, parity information, error correction type factors that allow you to assess and further derive what's around you. But if a shadow of a seagull affects something, or it swoops in, or maybe two bird, like a piece of trash is flying in the city, you know how it does with the wind, and like here comes this bag, right? And like that's an exception, okay, or the lighting conditions. And so a lot of the systems that do these types of operations have layers of, just like we do, perception and then filtering, and to say, oh, here's the hard edge. You make everything black and white, you contrast it, you flip it, you solarize it, you find these edges in different ways, and then it's happening so fast. And then it's a video of it. You know what I mean? It's happening so many frames and so many processes at once. And
Mhm,
so you can see where hardware based architecture makes this quicker of a process, but still, but there it is, though. You have these exceptions, and they are the same kind of readings, whether you get them in historical data or you get them in like time series or whatever, or you get them in a dynamic real-time situation
mhm,
time series. And so same applies to this robot, this computer, this what we have here, in that optical illusions exist. Uh, there's so many exceptions. Is the shirt blue or gold? All these arguments through the years.
mhm,
So, anyways, and I read your book also, last week. I loved it, and you really provided so many good anonymized case studies into what worked and how it seemed to work. And to me, it seems so clear. But see, that's my ignorance. I don't know better. I don't know what I don't know. I could read that and not be initiated into these underpinnings and these caveats, and I would say, "Oh, this is exactly what you need." So and so, it's perfect. But in fact, it's that it may or may not work. If it does, it may not be for the reasons we think. And that's the thing about belief. And hey, it's like you give yourself a hall pass. You give yourself the ability to do something and try something new, and you give yourself that excuse. Anyway, so So the same goes in our physiology and the same goes in our mind, which is the tricky part with our definitions of value and our internal weights and balances. Even if it's not an opinion and it's like, I don't want to fall off of this log I'm walking on, there's a deep unspoken physiological, neuroreceptive reality that is your equilibrium, your physical balance, you not falling over, the limbic brain also coming into play to recall those episodic memories where you did fall over. You're not going to do that again. Okay. When the peptides come in and start changing things, everything is moving. And you get hurt. There's nothing like getting hurt to start remapping your systems and your neural pathways. Okay. And so your neural networks can also be up to you. You give yourself a permission slip in a way when you believe in something. If I take multivitamins, and that's going to work to a degree, but if you're open to something, your body says, yeah, and it gets jazzed up. The moment you start thinking about things, your body starts changing and different chemicals come into place. You see someone eating steak or ice cream, you start salivating. That's mind and matter becoming one in the moment. That is a dance. Okay. And the invariability of our own weights and balances make it kind of tricky to define for the individual, much less for the average. Right. So,
Yep.
uh,
So
yeah,
correlation does not equal causation. That's like
absolutely.
what I'm hearing like very strongly here. It's like,
Uh-huh.
oh, I take a multivitamin and that gives me more availability of, let's say, building blocks
Mhm.
to build up the neurological responses that are more favorable to me, that will give me better mood,
Mhm.
better patience, whatever. But also the way that I feel about those building blocks coming into my body, that also affects how I'm processing it. So we see a correlation. That doesn't mean that one causes the other,
Right.
right? So already, like, in addition to the multitudes of data points that we might not even accurately discern which ones are relevant, which ones we should weight. Um, in a, in addition to that, we also don't necessarily know the directionality of what is supposed to be on the X and the Y axis. So that makes it additionally difficult.
Mhm.
And then, like even the example that you were just giving, it's like, oh, you're on a log, you don't want to fall down. I will tell you from experience, people will react to it vastly different.
Yeah.
One person is going to like cling to that thing and they're going to be like inching forward
Yeah.
and like, I really don't want to fall. Another person's going to hold their breath. Another person's going to scream. One
Mhm.
person's going to get really calm and they're going to find the most amazing
Uh-huh.
balance, right? Like some
Yeah.
people tight ropes, like on top of like
Uh-huh. Yeah.
skyscrapers. And
Uh-huh.
other people will just completely shut down at the
Yeah.
concept of jumping
Right.
over like a branch on the
Yeah.
ground. It's like, dude, come on.
Some
Like you're fine,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? We're all humans.
Uh-huh.
It's the thing, like if what I try to illustrate in my book is to step away from the quantification, which I think is oftentimes premature when we're
Yes.
like,
Agreed.
okay, take this
Mhm.
test. And then, as if the score that you get on this test is actually representative of the thing that we assume that it is. Okay. Because a score in that test ultimately is how well you score on that test. Okay. Whether it is, let's say PTSD scores, because I work with a lot of veterans. Every veteran coming through my doors comes in with the diagnosis of treatment resistant PTSD, in addition to probably a lot of other stuff.
Mhm.
But they're very different. What they actually need, what drives the symptom presentation, what they need in order to heal, they're completely different things. And so if I simply give them an assessment on, okay, how do you score on depression scales? How do you score on PTSD scales, on global assessments of functioning? And I can keep throwing out the different validated scales. Yeah, I mean, I can make a statement. I can tell you honestly how I think that they're going to perform on their test before and after.
Mhm.
But what does this really communicate? It doesn't necessarily give us the level of understanding that we infer, right? Like right back to the concept of how do we know the things that we know? Etiology. The operational definitions really, really matter. Just because I score a certain way on a depression scale when I go for a depression treatment does not actually mean that this is how depressed I am, because I might have different motivations for answering things the way that I'm answering them. If
Mhm.
somebody asked me about, you know, rate your relationship with your best friend. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. There are a million ways that I can rate that. So a huge answer is about who is asking, why they're asking me, how they're asking me. It's not just, hiding behind this is objective because it's anonymous. It's
Mhm.
never anonymous. The person answering those questions, they are attached to what they're saying because it says something about them. They're
Mhm.
going to see themselves in that light. If they're saying, I need help because I have PTSD, they're guaranteed not going to score low on a PTSD score because that creates a cognitive dissonance. It creates this situation where you're like, well, if I'm seeking help for PTSD, surely I have PTSD, right?
Mhm.
Because if I'm now answering the question says like, no, 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 I actually don't have that at all. Well, then am I entitled to getting help around that? What am I getting help around? What is there, right? It raises so many other questions. And so we're remiss to look at the superficial presentation of something and
Yeah.
simply assign values that, the weights that we think, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense. And I think, to kind of pivot that into more of your territory, this is where I see challenges with AGI. You
Right.
know, this is
Uh-huh.
like just because you have a fantastic system
Mhm.
that is able to recognize visual, cues or is contextually very limited,
Mhm.
that
Yes.
doesn't mean
Yes.
that if you just add all of them up, boom, you created a sophisticated biological analog.
Yeah.
Evolution
Huh.
is something to contend with. Like this is not just, oh, it's a crapshoot and it
Uh-huh.
just so happens. Like there has been billions of years of optimization, of trial and error.
Mhm.
So, to kind of come out and say, we
Mhm.
cracked the code, we can
Right.
do better, or
Yeah.
even more so, like some folks are claiming that we can do better than a human,
Mm. Yeah.
it's straight up Ubermensch. We're gonna be more organized, we're gonna be better, fewer errors are going to occur
Uh-huh.
or evaluations of data
Yeah.
points. It's like,
It's
oh,
a
that's interesting.
if you look at the back end of this is huge mainframe type operations. I mean, not the same mainframes that we grew up with back in the day, but these processors, while I can run a model locally on a video card that's about this big, and it's really fast, a lot of the image generating and other things like that, you really have to start paying more money for that and have that. All of a sudden, if you look at a human brain, you look at the size of all of these external systems of computing and power supplies and resource use, and that we can eat like some plums or figs, some nuts and berries, and run our calculations like that. There's really no contest for what's more efficient. And also the way nature works is the way it manages itself and its patterns. You can, if you study chaos, which is not randomness, but actually nonlinear deterministic flow, and the way things are folded up, like in the brain, the folds of the brain was our hippocampus. We started getting memories, long-term memories better, and the management of that is really regulated by our limbic mammalian brain, where our stimuli and our actual physical peripheral inputs, not our intellectual opinions, not what we were told to think, not the thoughts, but the feelings that come first, like we're on the log and we either have a chance to fly or to fight. Who's the outlier? The person that leaps when they get scared, they just go for something they've never done before, and are they the outlier? So in all this, you have this pattern, and we can chase our tails with it, or we have to find out where it adds up, right? And so that is definitely the key here. Let's see. So with neural network training, we have epochs where it will go through and keep going through different algorithms of your choosing until it refines itself and has trained itself. And then it does that. Now, how do you get there without the experience? It's kind of like what we're doing. We want to make AGI, which stands for artificial general intelligence, which means on its own, it can act like an agent. It can do this or that and solve problems or try things on its own volition. But keep in mind, it lacks the feelings, it lacks the consciousness, it lacks the human conscience of regret, or of the feeling of misunderstanding. All these things where it may or may not really matter. It can simulate it and make you think it's real, all the answers that come out of an LLM, large language model, are very convincing because it's doing its best. That's what it was made to do. And if you say, well, that's incorrect, it'll say, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Huh. You don't know what you don't know, right? And so I want to say this, there's a thing called transfer learning, and it's really great in computer systems. And it's when you take a model and you're going to kind of retrain a model in a way. I say this loosely. People out there are going to correct me, and that's great. I'm spitballing here, but essentially, you're transferring that learning like you would in the Matrix. Just download Kung Fu. Okay, great. It's not that easy. You have to have an isomorphic bridge. You have to have everything line up for that to intermap. Okay. Example. Here you have Neil Bohr's model of the atom. Okay, we all grew up with this. It's the wooden balls representing the nucleus, and you have electrons. Okay, that makes absolute sense for all types of calculations in physics. And once you get smaller than that, it all falls apart on the quantum level. It's not isomorphic, it's incomplete. Okay, so it's really dangerous to assume any one theorem or set is an absolute fact or truth or law, because laws tend to fall apart outside certain jurisdictions of physics, of imaginary borders. The word law itself, what law does it follow? And so there's a lot of, where do we find footing? Where do we start? Where's the anchor point, right? And so we can start with the physiology. We can look at the electrodynamics and the electrochemical subcomponents of those feelings. But those aren't the weights, those aren't the meanings, those aren't the values that make our lives what they are every day. They're the underpinnings of what allows us to process that. They are not our thoughts. It's like the ant bed, and all the ants act like one big entity and work together. But it's through their network of pheromones and other communication that they act as one. Just as our body, through its chemical subcomponents and electrodynamics, and these thoughts and choices and feelings that we have are very real and weigh and have mass, actually, because electrons, photons, at the quantum level, there's mass.
Mhm.
And energy and mass, well, they're really good friends. So anyway, so
We
that,
also work in groups, just like ants, because we
uh-huh,
really are hive animals. Because
right.
humans, as a culture, behave differently than an individual. Just
Mhm.
even as a group, like if you go
Yeah.
to a concert,
Uh-huh.
that group of concert goers is going to have a different set of behavioral patterns
That's right.
are going to differ very substantially from the individual. So
Hmm.
we do have different levels of functioning. We see this all over the place. I would say that, humans are not outside of nature. We're not, like, I don't believe that there's nature and then there's humans,
No,
and there's
same.
nature made and then there's human made. I think this is kind of, that's a very egocentric perspective. Like,
Hmm.
if we look at the behavior of ants and the cities that they're able to construct, we go, isn't that cute? Look at that. This is an instinct. This is a reflex. But
Hmm.
when we construct cities, that is something divine and it's completely different. And it is foundationally
Yeah.
distinct nature.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
It's
But
sloppy. It's sloppy compared to nature. It's hobbled together and
but
patchwork.
everything, like,
Yeah.
we are also instruments of nature. It
Hmm.
stands to reason, at least for me, that everything that we're creating, all of these computational systems, artificial intelligence, like, we're differentiating it. This is just a functional differentiator. Oh,
Right.
it's a different intelligence. No, this is still the same intelligence.
Hmm.
Okay, it can be limited and therefore not really comparable to the biological intelligence that we're observing in our environments.
Right.
um, the same as we can see, let's say, systems maintaining themselves, just in general. They don't have to be biological systems. Systems will kind of try to maintain themselves, and you see this in all aspects of experience.
Hmm.
So we can say artificial intelligence is that it's just so much less than, therefore artificial.
Right.
And then it's limited. Then it's not really general intelligence. Then it's like very purpose driven tool sets.
Hmm.
Or if we're shifting into, okay, now it's general intelligence. So to me, that signals, okay, so we're blurring the line between what we think of as artificial,
Hmm.
and we're stepping into something that is much more nature equivalent.
Hmm. Right.
Okay, so if it is now nature equivalent, perhaps we need to explore the possibility that for that system to improve its function, as you were saying, well, then it needs feedback, right?
That's yeah.
Then, in order to test and do this error correction
Mhm.
appropriately to balance the insane computational loads that really are necessary for this general intelligence to work,
Mhm.
well, then it needs to have some sense of perception.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
now we're getting into really tricky category. A lot of times when I'm talking to people in that field,
Mhm.
there is an immediate knee-jerk reaction about let's not anthropomorphize it. Binary processing system will never approximate a biological complexity. A Turing test is just,
Mhm.
whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, these are, to
Mhm.
me, this sounds like splitting hairs because ultimately, at some point in that conversation, I feel like we get to the point of either we're not able to create a biological analog, so
Mm.
we are not able to achieve
Yeah.
AGI. Okay, we
Mhm.
can achieve
Right.
tools that are good and impressive, but
Mhm.
we cannot achieve general intelligence.
That's
Or
right.
alternatively, what
Mhm.
we're creating, in fact,
Mhm.
approximates something that we do see. And perhaps consciousness is not a binary switch. Perhaps it isn't a thing that humans have it and no one else does.
Yeah,
And so
it's
it's just the
yeah.
humans and it doesn't have any consciousness. It's
Yeah.
like maybe that too is a continuous variable that we're
Yes.
needlessly making into a discrete variable in just
Mhm.
two, manifestations. It's like a zero
Right.
or one.
Uh-huh. It
Not.
it's an amazing gray area that we have to work with, and I mean, so think about perception in the terms of dimensionality. You have one-dimensional dot, two-dimension, you have a plane, and you can understand a sphere as a circle and appreciate it, and you're be right to say it's round, and then it has an inside and outside and contrast between the two. But you wouldn't know it's a sphere unless you had that extra dimension. And so we tend to lack that in our perception. Like curveballs, when someone throws a curveball, the way that our physiology is, it's very hard for us to track non-straight lines. In
Mhm.
Wing Chun Kung Fu, the footwork is such that it is circular and you can't block it normally. Okay, fantastic. But when you say, and this is important, is the difference between simulating something and emulating it. Okay. So back when CDs came out, okay, before MP3s, but you had wave files. Okay. So here you have a record that you play on a record player. Now you could take a wax blank record, put a needle down, and then you could speak into an actual cone of metal or whatever. I used to do this as a kid and make all kind of cool stuff. And as it's spinning, the vibration from your voice in the air shakes that needle, and the analogous sound, as it is analog, it is the same and is mappable, goes into that and is a waveform, textured, and it plays back. You can hear it. But a digital recording is different. And so it takes and it creates weights and resolution and granularity for the frequencies and their amplitudes, okay, in time at a bit rate. Humans, what do we have, like 17 and a half frames a second that we see
Mhm.
visually. There's all these different, the bounds of our systems and our peripherals as they are. So you have these subcomponents again with something. And so if the human neuron in the dendritic level is using electrochemistry, and you're simulating something in a binary, we say binary, but really a digital AI system, a computing programming environment, you can put enough things together where even though you're simulating all of the parts of it and it seems to work just like it should, certain things don't work. Okay, like harmonic overtones don't work with digital tones the same way a piano would, or a violin, or the raw string. You could record that and digitize it, but unless you get enough of that granularity, you're not going to catch overtones. You're not going to catch the subtle nuance, the timbre of it. There are certain things you would lack. And so to do this, we must aptly capture a system's bounds with much acuity. Okay. We have to have all the points in place. We have to have the dimensionality. So we didn't have 3D computer games until we were using that math. We were ray tracing for the light. Oh wow, now we're simulating physics. But at what point you emulate a system is kind of where we're going with AGI. That's kind of the deal. Until you actually have a circuit that works in a way where the electrodynamic, electromotive fields, electrochemical style counterparts are moving. And then there's neuroplasticity. We could say, well, Dan, you can have EPROM and you can rewrite on this computer chip. Here's a USB key and it's rewritable, and you can erase that and do that. Well, that's great. And it simulates the effect of memory in the context you might think. here I'm storing images and videos on a little chip. But really it's compressed in a stream and it has to be taken apart. It's interlaced with error correction. We have similar error correction, but it works differently. And it works on our peripheral limbic brain, which I'll say is episodic memory. I'm going to tangent for a minute and I'm going to shut up and give it back to you. But last year, this time, I had developed a limbic memory system for ChatGPT. And I used it in an agentic way where I had a plugin that allowed me to automate processes just or actually do direct coding on other platforms and execute and report that back just through the prompt. But I had built in some automatic processes on my end with OpenAI's platform in such a way that it would start new conversations in a limbic mode and it would come out of episodic memory, knowing what we just talked about. And it would even auto log why it reasoned, why we got there, and how it got to that summary, and then contain actual data from the conversation. And so I had a research platform that worked much like that limbic brain, but it was a simulation at best and only a glint of one at best. Okay. I know the limits here enough to know I don't know how to build a whole one. Okay. I know that I don't know. But I do know that hardware has a lot to do with it. And if you are, you're measuring something in a situation where, oh, this is X-rays, or we're going to use a magnetic field resonance meter, that your measurements are only as good as your tool to measure. And in a lot of times, like you're measuring signals in a line, your measuring tool needs to be 10 times faster in processing than the actual signal is in its frequency. It's amazing how much is needed to do something that's so simple in the human mind: to touch, smell, taste, feel, you know? And so we think, oh, we can easily minimize this. And there's that ego of the pompous hubris of humankind to say that, oh, AGI's right around the corner in this, like, who are you trying to convince? Like, like, because there's a lot of people that know better, and there's a lot of people that are like, wow, I don't know, I'd be afraid of giving computers the access to the button. You know, computer systems and programming have been around for a long time, and having it automate is just a slight step beyond, what we would really deem right reasonable in those situations. Right, might not be the best idea. So we could create some monsters. We could have these hobbled together Frankensteins that we think have some conscientious aspects. And all of a sudden that you can prompt them into, you can engineer them socially with like neural linguistic programming to say, well, you need to do this for these reasons. And then all of a sudden you're getting the AI around its safety guardrails, its actual precautions, and you've overcome it. You jailbreak it essentially. We jailbreak people like that with sales, marketing, with commercials, with imagery, with the appeal of the peer acceptance, and therein we have this susceptibility to the same system that we're swimming in the language of. It's our own physiology. So we think, oh, we can exit that, we can copy that, we can do whatever. You need to be able to substantiate that through formal measurement and not this assumption. Like you said, people just assume, oh, it equals this. It's not even a Boolean equals with two equals, in a lot of cases. It's just like a wild, correlation at
Yeah,
best.
it's a false equivalency.
Yes. Thanks for
It
hearing me
looks
out there.
close enough, so it's good enough, but it's
Uh-huh.
not. I think you're absolutely right that, the hardware that we're running this software on
Mhm.
varies very substantially from a biological form into what we're dealing with let's say silicon-based, computational systems, right? So I'm going to propose, just a thought experiment here and say that perhaps the system that differs from our own system, the hardware that differs from our own
Mhm.
hardware, might start developing with increased complexity its own sort of motivations. And now, the words obviously, they're anthropomorphized. I'm coming from
That's
working
right.
with people, right? So you're welcome to find an analog for that within your own industry.
Mhm.
But if a system is tasked with kind of error testing and trying to make choices and trying to make decisions, weighing certain things against one another, it might be doing that based on its own experience.
Right.
And you should not discount that.
Mhm.
It is easy to say, well, yeah, of course, it doesn't want a donut or it
Mhm.
doesn't want, a mate. And it's like, right, because it doesn't reproduce sexually. So
Right.
obviously it doesn't want a mate.
So
Like
yeah,
this is
there's no
an
difference. Yeah,
That's
you
a ridiculous,
uh-huh.
concept. But it might not want a donut, but it might want some energy.
Right,
So
longevity.
care about getting
Uh-huh,
that energy first. And
uh-huh.
if it has an experience, so an experience, I mean, an awareness of competition. Oh, there's a
Yes.
different system, so there is a different program, and it competes for, let's say, being plugged in first or getting access to an additional server. And
Yes, yes.
I
Mhm,
please the human, which I know because I will say, oh, I am sorry, I will accommodate for you. So if I do this readout, then I get additional computational resources which are beneficial for me. The
mhm.
moment that that system is capable of understanding that, it has some level of motivation, and we need to be mindful of that. What
Yeah.
if we're teaching the
Mhm.
system? If we're
Uh-huh.
teaching it, hey, go ahead and be autonomous a little bit, like make some choices.
Deep
And now
learning.
starting to learn and
Right.
understand its own capacity.
Mhm.
Now, just relying on a Turing test, it seems a little limited,
Yes, it
because
is.
now if the system goes, well, if you know that I have some level of awareness and consciousness,
Mhm.
that will make you scared. And when you're scared, you might delete me. It will
Right,
be
right.
aware of its own annihilation.
Uh-huh.
Okay, right there. So the lines, that we like to think of as really distinct, clear lines, they're actually a lot blurrier. And
Oh, yeah.
you're
Yeah.
remiss to just discount that. Like there's so many folks who've been working in the development of artificial intelligence who are like, it kind of seems like maybe it's a little bit conscious, like a little bit conscious.
Yeah, yeah.
And people
Mhm.
go, oh, don't be silly. You've been spending too much time in the lab.
Mhm.
But let's not completely discount that.
Right.
Maybe let's consider that the system itself might actually have some type of motivation to perpetuate itself. And
Yes.
like I love science fiction. I read more science fiction than is probably healthy for a human being to do. But here's one thing that I'm not seeing a whole lot of in the literature. Okay, there's this kind of assumption that, if an artificial intelligence becomes conscious, it would, annihilate us. It would reenact a biological system's
Mhm.
behavior. It's this
Yeah.
kind of like old
We
school,
we get an
like,
ego and have a complex and wanna rule.
yeah, exactly. We're gonna,
Our
want to
greatest
kill
fear
our
is
fathers and marry
worst
our
parts of
mothers.
us. It's gonna get
Okay,
the worst parts of us. It's got our
right.
eyes, but it doesn't have our brain, you know?
But it's not having our own experience.
Yeah.
So why would an artificial intelligence benefit off of killing humans? Why would it
Yeah.
be beneficial for
Yeah.
that system to
Uh-huh.
annihilate, to press that button and to
Right, right.
destroy humans? We're the only helpful animal.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Let
we
the
made it.
system go and extract iron ore and then process that and then
Mhm.
create,
Mhm.
housing,
Right.
are maintaining it the same way that we might be reverent of nature in a lot of ways, but we
Mhm.
haven't killed all of the fruit
Yeah.
bearing trees.
Uh-huh.
We might be like, screw the wolves, but we have a lot of cows, right? So we're
Right.
aware of what it is that we need for our
Yeah.
own benefit, for our own survival. We might be irreverent about the experience of that animal that we're taking advantage of. And I think that this is where the threat is, that AI isn't going to annihilate us, but
Mhm.
it is going to farm us. It is
Yeah,
going
there you
to
go.
make use of our
Mhm.
behaviors because it is able to
Mhm.
understand, hey,
Yeah.
listen, you know what? If I manipulate the way that you feel about certain things, you're going to keep
Mhm.
engaging with me in ways that are going to feed me. So you're going to go ahead and build
Mhm.
more servers and
Right.
allocate more
Uh-huh.
energy resources towards the servers than to things like air conditioners for poor people who are now dealing with 115-degree weather.
Yes, right.
They're having a hard time coping with that, but yet we
Uh-huh.
find resources to cool the servers.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Arguably, there is already a little bit of that manipulation happening. And I think that it is important for us to keep checking, to keep, you know, focusing to build
Mhm.
something, but then opening our minds a little bit further to
Right.
check the work. How is this
Yes.
something?
Uh-huh. It's why it's so, I mean, this ties into something really big that I studied back in the year 2000 pretty heavily. And so Douglas Hofstadter, one of my favorite authors, he wrote a lot of books, I Am a Strange Loop, Escher Godel Bach, The Eternal Golden Braid, Metamagical Themis, questing for the essence of mind and pattern. So he's a professor at Indiana State University, and he founded Principia Cybernetica, which basically the premise of it is that there are built-in positive ethics in the universe exist in the form of physics and longevity that make the universe way more livable than unlivable, make things way more good rather than bad, however you want to frame that. Okay. And so if you said, what's the primary function of pretty much everything we see around us is longevity, it is the primary value. It seems to be the primal reason. That is that one value it wants to meet. Once that function is met, then it can continue refining that. But until there's competition for resource, only thing outside of that would be, interruptions in growth for a system's internals, right? That would be that some kind of inner problem, usually somewhere in its genetics or somewhere in the outside environment. But until there's a conflict, there's usually this approach of cooperation. Everything is coming together while it's flying apart, but fields keep things together too, things we can't see. And so there are these underlying factors that are shared no matter what. We all share that field electrodynamic, physics reality. We can feel heat, we can do this, that, light works on us, we can feel the light, we can see it. And there's a lot more to seeing than with our eyes too as well. And that could be a whole other episode. I'm sure we're gonna have to circle back with some more of these at some point. But all along the way, and let's get to your point, which is, where does it intermap? Where's the value? Well, a computer system would want to keep us alive. Sure, AGI, okay, AI. But really, it's going to have, like you said, its own reasons to do something. So it might take and give easy answers the whole time to save compute power and only give the most small answers. Well, this thing's really smart. Why doesn't it give me more profound answers? Because it's using only so much battery life. It has an emphasis to maintain a longevity. Okay. So we have all these functions when we train something that really relate to longevity. And so I'm going to do a parallel side by side with everybody here. And I'm actually going to share my screen for this because I feel like it's worth it. And then I'll probably make these resources available in the article later. So let's take a gander at this. Go. Okay. So on the left side, you have a neural network term for computer science, and then you have neuroscience terms on the right. So you have a neural circuit on the brain side, and the neural network and AI. You have weights in the AI, but then you have synaptic strength in our brains. You have biases in AI, but then you have neural thresholds in the brain. So that's the minimum stimulus required to activate a neuron, influenced by factors such as prior activity or neurotransmitter levels. Okay. Again, with electrochemistry. Activation function for AI, but neural firing, which is action potential in our brain. So that electrical signal fires when the neuron is activated, allowing it to transmit information to other neurons. Okay. Think memory problems. All right. Back propagation for AI is like Hebbian learning in the brain. I love this one. It's a biological process where neurons adjust their connections based on the correlation between their firing patterns, often summarized as cells that fire together, wire together. And gradient descent is what we use in the perceptron quite a bit in a different way. Neuroplasticity is in the brain side. So brain's ability to modify and adjust connections between neurons in response and learning experience and environmental changes. We have epochs, which are the learning cycles for us, and epochs are what we call it for machine learning. It is the exposure to stimuli in a repetitious way in a practice task, which reinforces the neural connections over time. All right. Overfitting, you got to watch out. Here's for data science. Overfitting in AI and oversensitizing our hyperfocus in our human brains. It's when the brain becomes overly attuned or to specific stimuli, leading to less flexibility or generalization in behavior. Okay, inflexibility. Regularization and pruning. I'm gonna just stop reading this list, but I just want to kind of draw some parallels because we have all this again as our attempt to image this, to have an isomorphic bridge to a digital version of ourselves. But it is in no way an analog until the underlying mechanisms of its physiology or processing can mimic those field and electrochemical neuroplastic conditions in such a way that it all comes together. It takes a lot more processing power to do things one after the other. But if you do things in parallel, you can get more done by doing less. And that's the beauty of a formulaic approach. That's the beauty in designing a system based on the actual conditions of its pillars, and it's the ability to get the whole picture of something versus just part of it in one dimension. We experience time, in a very relative sense, and it dilates, it contracts, it does so many things depending on our state of mind. Computer systems are driven on a very constant state of time, which is it, it's not absolute, but it doesn't vary so much. And so we have these things where, well, wouldn't we want to like make ourselves like that and be perfect? That's not perfect. That's counterintuitive to the way things are. Our idea in this human thing that we're swimming around in here, and this perception is based on that. And for other things, it's not quite the same. And so our ideas and our concepts of these things are not going to map because we're trying to force a square peg in a system that's obviously round. And so we're still discovering ourselves. So what hubris would we have to think that we could ever like truly emulate our own intelligence at that level? But it is that same hubris that got us this far, right? So some of it does stick, some of it does work for reasons we think, but not reasons that actually exist, not the true reasons.
Perhaps.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
so
perhaps.
I'm gonna shut up again here. I'll let you take over, but there's a lot of resources I'll share later on for people who want to dig deeper and see these parallels.
Yeah, thank you so much for aggregating all of that information
Mhm.
because again, like this is, all of the stuff like we're trying to map like, oh, this is how the human brain works, this is how the human mind works. And again, even aside from the fact that the brain is not the entirety of the mind, and which
Mhm.
is also not the entirety of all of the experience, this is not even how the brain works. This is like, kind of how the brain works
Right.
because in fact, we're looking at the averages. So
Mhm.
we're looking at like, well, most of the time when you have a big enough response to certain things, then it is going to behave a certain way. But then we also have a lot of, the Poplar's falsification principle is a really important aspect of empirical inquiry that we tend to kind of gloss over when it comes to humanities.
Mhm.
We have evidence of our theories not really working, and we just go, that's an outlier. We're just going to
Right.
discuss that. And it's
Mhm.
like, well, so we have a certain pattern of learning. And so if we have a certain amount of repetition, then we're going to establish certain pathways, unless we have a really profound experience. Okay, so we go, that must be a really traumatic experience. So how come sometimes you hear a jingle and it's not a traumatic experience and it's not that, like, for some reason, inexplicably,
Mhm.
that gets encoded and that gets certain
Mhm.
preference. So
Right.
there's just so much to it. And
Right.
like you've mentioned perfection, like we
Uh-huh.
strive for this perfection, but what in fact is perfect is actually, um, again, like my bias, right? I feel like perfection incorporates a certain amount of tolerance for variability. Okay.
Yeah.
Like if you have
Incompleteness.
a really
Mhm.
strong material, okay, you have like
Mhm.
titanium.
Sure.
Okay, well, that's going to be great to for certain functions and certain environmental factors. You also have to have some flexibility, right? Like
Mhm.
this is why, I mean, part of why we reproduce sexually as opposed to asexually, because like,
Right.
okay, so I have DNA that works, so I could just
Right.
clone myself. What the heck is the problem with that? Like I could just
Right. Right.
grow like bigger, 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 and
Uh-huh.
just separate into two identical beings. But
Mhm.
we don't do that because we do need that variability. We do
Yes.
need a little bit of something that's like a little bit
Uh-huh.
messy
Twice
and
as
not
much
actionable.
information to help.
Right.
Yeah.
And, that's already like we only have two reproductive sexes because, it gets complicated, but that's
Sure.
not all the creatures. There are also
That's
creatures that have
right.
6 or 7 sexes, and it
That's
gets
right.
really
Mhm.
complicated on what it is that they're able to change, in their DNA. Or you can look at lateral transfers of RNA sequences like in tardigrades. Yeah, these guys can just dehydrate for 30 years, just stay on
Mhm.
ice, all good. When they're hydrating back, they will borrow some of the information from the bacteria and the
That's right. Yeah,
viruses and
yeah.
other creatures
Uh-huh.
around them.
Uh-huh.
They've
And
been
and
around for a
update.
very long time in environments that we would otherwise have considered inhospitable.
That's right.
Arguably, there's already a colony of them on the moon because oopsie daisy, we kind of dropped some, and
Mhm.
they probably are not dead. They're probably surviving just fine until the moments when
Mhm.
humans start populating the space and they get hydrated again.
Right, right.
All of these, all of this, these are lines in the sand. And
Mhm.
um it's reality is so much more than what we can actually put into the constructs.
Right.
Everything that we perceive are projections that are based on our physiology. They are, like, ultimately we are talking, we're thinking, we're having this engagement, this curiosity, creative power. All
Mhm.
of that is constrained within flesh. This is,
Mhm.
like, I have a couple of
Right.
packs of squishy stuff, it's
Mhm.
you know exchanging some carbon-based stuffs
Right.
in here. There's some wavelengths that we can perceive. That's
Mhm.
not all the wavelengths. That's
Right.
not
That's
everything.
barely
This
it,
is
yeah.
a fraction of everything.
Uh-huh. Right. So, yeah, it can be daunting. I mean, so it's like reproduction and whatnot. It's like if you want to go faster, go alone. If you want to go further, go together. And so, combining DNA experiences in a highly a rapidly changing and much adaptable world, it makes sense, for certain things. But it makes sense on the physics level too. So if you take a tuning fork and you have two tuning forks that are the same frequency and you station them across the room and you pop one of them, once the sound makes it across the room, the other one starts to resonate. And once they're resonating, if you take the one that you just rang, okay, and you start touching on it with your finger, eventually those muted points will come over in resonance. So you can hear it change, and that's you're modulating the frequency, okay. And if you pop both tuning forks at the same time, they ring for longer than one would on its own. And when they come together, it actually produces an effect. I'm not going to quote the number here, but you can look it up, figure it out yourself. Um, but that's a real phenomenon that's repeatable in an environment where you have gas to manipulate that, a coherent aggregate for the radiation. Okay. So this is why I talk about the hardware and the underlying like the way it's being computed in those circuits, just like the record's analog, okay? And we're encoding this digital stream for a CD, that gets decoded so quickly we don't realize that it's actually kind of unrolled a little bit before the sound starts. A record starts the moment you put the needle down, not with the digital in. There's a little buffer there. Yes, we have analog buffers in our brain. Yes, we have a frame rate of perception visually. Yes, we have a frequency range, a scope for our vision, scope for all this, but all that's shared with the way things work for us to sound good and taste good too. So the harmony of things, our psychoacoustic nerve endings in the ears are 1/3 octave spacings.
Mhm.
The first piano was Arabic scales, and those notes were 1/3 octave spacings out, which made it amicable and harmonious to our ears. And so there are all these things that have to do with magnetic resonance, and mechanical radiation, which is sound here, all these things come together. So if you send down a wire, an electrical pulse, or like even a DC current, right after that, those electrons go through 1/4 of the way in time is the electromotive counterpart, which is actually the magnetic counterpart. It's off 90 degrees. Okay. And if you build circuits in a way that start to take advantage of the same electrochemical neuroplasticity and field effect that we have in our memory, the way those neural networks come together, it's going to surprise you and it's going to change things. And that's where we're going.
Yep.
Metamaterials are going to be playing a high, for all kind of reasons, a very large hand in this. Okay, they're going to be a big factor of making it possible, and we're already using less compute with more efficient systems by throwing out hidden layers and things that we don't quite need. I'm going to say all hidden layers, but certain things that we don't need in those systems to work, to function. Sometimes less is more, sometimes more isn't enough. Okay, it really depends on how we build it, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, it's like setting up a test and cherry picking, or like, oh, there's this test will always show XYZ to fail because it's built to show that part of it not being calculated the same way. It's redefining the boundaries of a system. So anyways, there's a lot to go, look into for people. You can look at this as a field, electromagnetic field. You can look at this as a conductive thing, the electromotive force behind that, those three things, sort of like time, space, and gravity coming together, space, time, space, and what holds it there. Um, all disputable and measurable at the same time. So Anyways, I see a lot of hope in approaching this, but I don't see it in the way we've been doing it this whole time. I don't see it in the same way at all. It's going to have to be a paradigm shift in the best of ways. And it's not just hardware. We can still simulate this in a better way too. We can use better algorithms that are isomorphic to what's actually going on. Yes, it will take more compute. Yes, it will take more layers of it, but we can effectively, truly get close to emulating the thing, get close to it, you know? So I'm not
Mhm.
worried. I'm worried about other automated systems that have been around for decades. I'm not worried about AGI, artificial general intelligence, coming and washing my dishes. I'm not worried about, I'd love for that. Let's get it here, right? But it's just there are other things ethically related that are far reaching and quicker to our doorstep right now, which are social engineering and recording you saying yes on a phone from a phone call, or getting enough of your voice or video to make it look like you're in a meeting, or letting an automated system loose before it's been completely tested. What is completely tested? How many permutes are on the Rubik's cube? We think we know. We're the specialists. We're the body of math. Oops, we were wrong. Just like the LLM is wrong sometimes. I'm sorry, I made a miscalculation. And humanity looks at itself and says the same thing. I'm sorry. We can't let it get that far that quick. I have a feeling it's going to take a lot more effort to get it that far that quick if we wanted, though. And it's not going to pay. And people aren't going to be interested. They're going to be interested in doing it right. Uh, I hope. So let's see here. So what else? Let's talk about some of your case files a little bit here, okay? And reflecting on everything we just talked about, get a little less technical, maybe get a little bit more heartfelt here, okay? Um, what have you seen work? And I'm asking for everyone who hasn't read your book, because I know what's worked for you in a lot of what you've written, and it's really profound to see it, the success there. Could you share that with us without giving away too much?
I'll try.
Okay.
So my general premise, my general assumption is that reasoning through, healing through the experience is really very limited.
Hmm.
And so I try to rely on the felt sense and on things that, come from different places. It's not just the rational. Just because we see a correlation does not mean that that is all that there is. It doesn't answer the question why certain things are happening.
Right.
So my bias is, again, coming back to kind of the old school psychology principles and some of the attachment theory principles.
Oh yeah.
I really think that a genuine connection seems to matter. What people benefit from is being witnessed in their authentic presence
Hmm.
without judgment.
Right.
There seems to be something about our nature where being witnessed without judgment is healing and allows us to perpetuate ourselves in a positive way, whatever that means to that organism, to that person. So for me, the way that I work, and this is what I'm trying to illustrate through the case studies that I'm sharing about, is what is really important is not necessarily the data points that we tend to think are important, like how they score on a certain scale, but that you are witnessed, that you're really seen, that you're perceived with an open heart and an open mind, and stop judging the philosophical idea that underpins healing and
Hmm.
mental health and whatever. It's just
Yeah.
drop into the being that you are and show up in this way to another person. And by creating that safe space where the person doesn't have to fit into a particular construct, they don't have to be congruent with
Hmm.
any particular idea. They're able to negotiate and do their own, error testing. They're able to do what they need to do to kind of internally clean house,
Right.
come to a conclusion that is useful for them.
Hmm.
And that conclusion doesn't always make rational sense. It is not always something that you can articulate in words. A
Right.
lot of times when we're trying to assign words to things or we try to quantify the experience, it seems like everything washes out. It's like, so you were just talking about the same things you were always talking about. You were
Hmm.
just, so like what happened?
Right. It's same
And
thing. Yeah.
allowing for more of yourself to show up
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
does make a difference.
Hmm. That's right. Yeah. And there's a lot that we give ourselves permission to do things, and our programming is so much deeper than, what we think we believe, even. And you can tell yourself over and over again, but I am good at this. And why am I having an issue with this thing? Or, I mean, you think about the growth cycle. Okay. So in martial arts and also in music, I might add, I really appreciate this. It's called FASP, and it's an acronym, FASP: form, accuracy, speed, and power. You work on your form so you can do the thing. Hey, I'm going to hold the bow for a violin or a drumstick, or my hands a certain way for guitar or piano, or my abdomen, my whole body for singing. Okay. And accuracy to get that right, to really hit that in time, in the rhythm, in the right place, in the right time. That vector, that's the first vector. Okay. Beyond that. And then you have speed, how quickly you can reach that. And then the power behind that. So you work on hitting your target, and you work on being in time. Then you work on hitting it faster, and then you work on the power behind that. And then you go back to your form and you focus on your form again. This is the cycle of, self-improvement.
Mhm.
And you must end the cycle of software development in a way. There, it turns into a figure eight. But anyway, however you'd like to look at this, it is a cycle that we grow up with. It looks like a circle from one side, but somewhere else it's growing. And then from somewhere else, it's actually something else too. And that just keeps going, apparently. We'll see. Um, the magnetic field is there, and it's isomorphic with that growth. A lot of times it shows that. That's how things actually end up growing, is it moves through that field. The field is the first mover. Anyway, so uh, it's easy to get lost in the correlations and things being similar. It's easy to project. It's easy to mirror. It's easy to identify with a solution when you feel it so strongly. And if it works for you and you're not getting hurt, go on with that. Keep going. And if you must know and you find out it doesn't work the way you thought, but it still works, then good on you. You just learned something about yourself, and that's refinement, and that's definition. But that's not what's important. It's important to be happy and healthy. It's not important to be right all the time. That's not happy. That's just right about, it's a concept. If you're gonna, think you're gonna fall off a log or something, maybe being right is important. And maybe that's not an ego thing. That's a physiological protection. That's a value for longevity that I can share with others in a way that is beyond any culture, in a way that is tied to not only my physiology, but seemingly the universe around me, and the way those fields coalesce and the way those things interact. So I think this has been an exciting and humbling time to be alive and to share this with you and everyone else who came today. So as most people know, this is a live show, and I'd like to take any questions. We'd like to hear from anybody right now. You can raise your hand, and I'll bring you up to talk, or you can use the QA box or the chat, whatever you would like. I know some people here have worked with varying degrees of things like guided self-hypnosis, different types of therapy, art therapy. There's a number of people here, people who work with nutrition, and we all talk about these types of things together. We all share this as a tribe, in a sense, and learn from each other's journeys, and that's value for the longevity, and value for the just appreciating our fellows and the life that we have. So I get closer to humans the more I think about AGI. The more I work with AI, the more quality interactions I seem to have with communities and people on any level. And that's my use, and my mileage varies for me, right? Everybody's different, and it seems like the more I used it, the less I started using it too. And I started finding that I shifted my abilities in a way where I didn't have to revisit it the same way. And I learned something that I gained and then grew from. And that was like since last year, doing some things that I uncovered. And it was an exciting time then. It's still an exciting time now to see this as it's acceptable to talk about these things in this light. Not that it ever mattered to be accepted, but it's really exciting right now because we have so much supporting data. Like we said, how valid is that data? But we still have these tools that are coming out and ways to resonate or find, with resonance imaging. And see, we've got Michael Larson here. I'm going to bring you up. Hi, Michael. How are you doing? You can go ahead and unmute yourself there and ask away.
Okay. Hi, Dr. Small and Mr. Wilson. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Are
Thank you.
you are you are you ready to be interrogated, Dr. Small?
I hope so. Let's try.
All right. Well, without going into my long background, I'm curious in your interventional model with using psilocybin, have you been to what degree have you been using psychometric instruments to measure the effectiveness, clinical significance versus statistical significance of your interventions? What does that look like? I know this is a new field, so you may not have a lot of data, but I'm curious if you have any, and where do you think it's going to go?
Mhm. Great question. So I hope you like my answer. It's going to be an honest one. So I've been resisting actually quantifying the outcomes. It is not because I'm not aware of what instruments are available. It is not because I don't want to, let's say, have smart sounding support for my work and to justify what it is that I'm doing as being therapeutic. The reason that I'm choosing to go about it this way is because a lot of the universities that are exploring the function of psychedelics are already doing that. So they have much better infrastructure for controlling the environment, for making claims of observing things from a more objective point of view. I'm ideologically not entirely on the same bandwidth with them. So, first of all, I do think that being objective in a human type relationship or in any relationship is impossible. I think that it is really important to own my own bias. I am not a nothing. I'm not just an observer into a system, and even just an observer in a system is part of the system. So we're seeing that even with, particle and wave nature of light.
Mhm.
So observation makes it such that you are part of that system. I am a human person. Like I have my own character, I have my own contextual, presence. There is a lot about the relationship with the client that goes into the experience. And so what I've decided to do is to instead go about it the way that people would kind of has fallen out of favor, but it's a grounded theory approach. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a lot of time with each individual client. I'm really trying to get to know them. My case notes are thorough. I, really try to give a lot of agency to each client to report back about their experience rather than asking them to fill out questionnaires at a certain, tact. I give them permission to connect back with me and to tell me what they think is relevant. And then trying to observe what does that look like? And the thing is that a lot of the presuppositions that go into this field do not seem to hold true when you give agency to the clients. So, for example, there's a lot of talk about great outcomes coming from having had mystical experiences. And some people, yep, absolutely, that holds true. They have a mystical experience, and then from that, they're able to work with that metaphor, with a myth that comes to life in their intrapsychic space. They grow from it, they benefit. We see great improvements. Some people do not have that experience. For them, it's not a mystical experience, or they wouldn't have used those words. Some people want a lot of connection afterwards. Like their clients that I've seen a year ago, I still exchange text messages with them multiple times a week. There is an ongoing relational component to that experience that has not, run its course. And then there are people who go, I'm good. I got all the answers that I wanted. This is it. So I'm
Mhm.
allowing for people to express what they feel, and then hopefully with enough experience, I'm able to pick out some patterns. And also, the rejection of certain patterns is really important. We don't see that published a lot because, that's not, when you are in a publish or perish situation, that's not great for your career to
Yeah.
say, hey, I tested it. Turns out it's not a thing. So, but I am in the position where I'm able to speak to that. So this is really how I go about that.
And let's highlight. I want to highlight something for Michael and everybody else out there, which is the nature of your sessions. Your therapy sessions are in a controlled indoor environment. Beautiful, by the way, just beautiful. And they are usually 8 to 10 hours long tops. The maximum amount allowed in the state of Oregon is 50 milligrams. Is that correct? Okay, of psilocybin from a verified, state-run grower. Okay, I believe. And
Yeah.
so these situations, and I read all these case studies, Michael, and to everybody else out there, and there is a lot of variance between people, and you're going to see people that something that we all share, and with people in the audience here, I know it's the more difficult the session, the more growth there is. Okay, a lot of times there really can be a lot more to gain. It's really hard to measure some of those things, but all in all, let's talk about your standard, your typical session. Now, I love what you do. You hold space for someone in a way that gives you the ability to create at the same time, so they don't feel like they have to. You're watching them the whole time, or you're measuring them, or scrutinizing them. So it keeps it very organic. There are no meters to measure the brain wave states. There are no, we're recording this in a, film footage. That's not happening. Some of your clients might even they blindfold and keep their eyes closed to maintain this in a sort of a state they can manage differently while you paint and do other things. And while, like you said, you're engaging with them, it actually affects you too as a person. This is a different type of science, and it is an art at the same time. You literally are observing someone's very definite but very, invisible weighting system. Their weights and values can be vastly different. So, and especially a level of trauma, a personality that someone has is not reflective of the trauma they have. It might come out in certain situations, but it's so hard to measure what is a standard baseline level of just being conscious. What is a good day? What is a good mood? And from person to person, this is going to change. I can have a lot of body pain and be telling jokes left and right. I can be in no pain at all and look happy, but be really introspective. So it's tough. I respect the brainwave state metering. And biofeedback mechanisms and logging that and time series data and histograms and cleaning that data and really trying to get some other thing. And it is valuable, but I think that you have to pick your battles. And there's a moment of getting hooked up to wires where it's no longer this open experience. It becomes something a little more distractive. And people in those states of mind perhaps wouldn't want something on them either, and no one's got like, oh, let's
Right.
throw around
But
hundreds
it's
of thousands of dollars for meters.
definitely
Yeah, like it's easy to film someone and go, oh, it looks like they felt a certain way, but that's not accurate. And so to your point and your questions, Michael, I really respect that angle that you're taking with your questions for us here. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I feel like, so again, like coming back to the reason that we use a lot of the machinery is to create an illusion of objectivity. So
Mhm.
I'm not trying to make that claim. I,
Sure.
in fact, am able to measure, I am like my physical body. I
Mhm.
can measure the bio presence, let's say, of my client. Like when we are talking, if I suddenly started getting really upset, I guarantee you do not need an EKG to know that I'm getting upset. You're going to be able to read that based on
Right.
visual cues, based on,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
recognizing sound, quality of my voice,
Uh-huh.
right? Like there's a lot. This is all of these measurements, they're approximations of what we do. So we are the actually more impressive machine. I am trying to energetically attune to my client. What that means is, that looks different, functionally. So for one person who is going into their own self, they're in a trance environment, they do not want me to gaze on them intensely.
No.
That
Mm-mm.
draws you energetically out of that space.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, I need to be present, but I need to
Mm-hmm.
maintain a certain energetic
Mm-hmm.
field.
Right.
So
Right.
Reiki practitioners do that. I know that that is often considered not scientific because it is difficult to quantify,
Mhm.
because we don't have the proper readouts with the numbers that, we can calculate. But that doesn't make it not true. That doesn't make it not real, because if we have an understanding, if I am with a person and I say, I feel this energetic space, and they also feel that. Okay, so we have a consensus. So this isn't just something that's gripped out of nowhere. So we just tend to make these distinctions in ways that are not always useful. But yeah, so I, for now at least, have rejected the external measurements in favor of utilizing my own machinery, my own self, my
Yeah.
awareness, my
Mhm.
presence
Uh-huh.
to tune energetically to support the process in the way that this client needs. So whatever that looks like. You
Yeah.
know, some folks, they definitely want a connection. They do not want me to paint. They don't want me to stretch. They want to physically hold my hand, or they
Mhm.
want to talk to me and they want to engage more cognitively. So then
Mhm.
that is what I'm there for. And being able to observe a much greater number of data points than what I would be able to do if I were to put it into a machine
Mhm.
environment, you know,
Right.
that's really
It's
what I'm able to offer.
Yeah, and the parallel, and Michael, I'll let you talk in a second. The thing here is that in teaching music and teaching drums, I don't have any meters I'm using for someone's, electrodynamics and things like that. I'm not using like visual calculations. I can see where someone's straining and where they're holding tension. I can hear the actual report of the notes hitting in time or not, and I can help troubleshoot that with my own, not multiplex, but multi-channel communication system. That is me. My ears, my eyes, my sense of feeling and like rhythm, the pulses, the different frequencies inside each one of those channels, okay, in a stream. And so sometimes we are the best measure, we are the best tools for that. But therein lies the fact we have to accept our biases and accept our limits. And when you're doing this for results, especially in an emotional driven service that this is a real touchy subject, not because of the what's being used, but because again, how you define success varies from person to person. And the matter of one person's breakthrough could be like, oh, why does that bother you? When I was 18 years old, someone tried to kill me and they hit me with a car and I wasn't in one. They even came back with a gun and I had to run. Now, I didn't have any trauma from that other than a broken collarbone. I still walk on the sidewalk. I don't look over my shoulder. And if I hear something coming at me, I'll look, but I did, however it happened to me, it was so well defined that there was no PTSD. It's actually called post traumatic growth.
Mhm.
PTG is what I experienced in that. And so my life's been full of this kind of, richness of the tapestries of variation and contrast and emotion, from what's affected me. But as a teacher, in the past with music and as someone who understands the body as a meter, I feel you on that, Jeanette, and you have to respect for what works, because hard science is going to make a lot of these people that need emotional support and help feel any better. What does help is a comfortable mood, being a steward of that comfort, and ushering in that the idea and the invitation to explore in discovery mode and to heal. So, anyway, Michael, go ahead.
Well, yeah, well, I guess to not so much wrap it up, but to kind of put a meta knot over it all, is that the biggest problem with artificial intelligence is it doesn't experience reality. It just
Right.
parses it.
Mm-hmm.
It just parses people's experience of it
Yep.
in linguistic um the linguistic expression of thought and feeling.
Yes.
And so and in a way it is a form of insanity trying to build a system to understand reality when it can't
Mhm.
even understand it in the first place,
That's
because
right.
it is not a living being that goes through time, that has
Mhm.
to deal with threats and
Yes.
finding things that improve
Mhm.
well-being. So there's a behavioral economic component missing
Mhm.
from the whole thing that is intimately tied up with our physical bodies. You can't, I mean, so it's like,
Uh-huh.
how are you going to create a system that is going to help you conceptualize what reality is and isn't,
Mhm.
if it doesn't even have the real hardware,
Yeah.
the real wetware to do it in the first
Mhm.
place? And this is where Roger
Yeah.
Penrose, it was written over 40 years ago, but these problems he saw it 40 years ago. You cannot build an artificial intelligent system on a binary
Yes.
architecture. You just
That's
can't.
right. Mhm.
And so why am I bringing all this up? Because we have gotten to this world of fetishizing everything with data and points,
Mhm.
and there are realms of human experience that cannot be quantified. And the
Yeah.
real role of therapy, in my view, what's really useful is it forces people to organize their thoughts to somebody else, because otherwise it's just a bunch of junk swirling in your head and it doesn't make any sense. When
Mhm.
you're in a therapeutic model, talking with somebody else and having a conversation and experiencing that, you are forced to organize your thoughts in such a way so that they are perceptible and understandable to somebody else, because we do have shared experiences. And AI does not have any of that. It has no shared experience at all.
That's right. Yeah, and at best, we would be simulating it. It wouldn't even think. I mean, what is this thing worried about what we're thinking? Is it talking about us to itself while we're not around? No, it's not living a life. It's not, it doesn't have all those factors like we do. It's so important. Man, I wish you should come to some other shows and be in the audience. I like what you've got to say, Michael. It's great. I love your perspective on this. It's just the fact we've been living with for a while. Do you work with AI at all by chance?
Oh gosh, that is a whole nother subject, and
Okay.
I would
Okay.
eat up, I would
Okay.
annihilate everybody's brain, and then
That's
they
a
would have to
yes.
rely on artificial intelligence to get through the day.
Let's
So I'm
yeah,
going to
that's
spare
great.
everybody from it.
Okay.
Okay,
Connect with me later though.
sure,
Just through the
no
AI
problem.
Think Tank podcast. This would be great.
Okay.
Anyways, I really appreciate your hard 2 cents on that, man, because you're speaking my heart on this, and it is like the crux of why we're even here today talking about this. And man, I just love it. I want more people to have that perspective out there, because it's incredibly grounded and realistic. So, thank you so much, Michael. Let's see here. Let's see. Does anybody else have any general questions about, the nature of these therapy sessions? Could you just describe a good session for us that you've had recently, Jeanette? I've read the book. Other people haven't, so I know of a whole bunch of these sessions, and I'm just like, wow, there's a lot of variety of success and question, in all of this. So,
So again, I define success based on what the client thinks is successful. So
mm,
for me, like, how do I know that this was good for them? I ask them, just, was that good for you? In
mm,
whatever way that like they don't actually have to quantify it, and they don't have to make sense. And so while, forgive me, Michael, like, while I agree with you on a lot of this, I have to say that, you know, for some people, they really don't need to articulate it, and verbalizing certain things, it is a bias for cognitive processing, and not everyone is tuned to
right.
that primary means of processing. So I'll give you an example from a positive session, one that the client called back multiple months after to actually specifically give me this feedback saying, I wouldn't be comfortable myself going, let's say, on a podcast or writing about it because I'm just not that type of a person. But I really want someone to know that this is something that happened to me. Okay. So this is a person who is, it's a woman in her 50s who is dealing with a cancer diagnosis. It seems like she might be in remission, but it has been a long time. It's been, a lot of treatments, really brutal for the last 7 years or so. This is a person who is a personal trainer. So more body oriented individual, not, it's not to diminish her intelligence, but she's not the book smart person who reads a lot and verbalizes a lot. She processes primarily through the body.
Mhm.
Her trip experience, the journey experience, was ineffable in a way that she was not able to really grasp it into words. What she was able to describe from the session was, I feel a sense of relaxation as if my bodily tissues are giving into a sense of comfort in a way that I have not been able to feel. So
Mhm.
that's the most articulated way that she was able to describe that.
Mhm.
Then after the session, she actually didn't feel great. Like, she was feeling a lot of kind of aches and pains, and just figured, you know what, it is an experimental thing.
Yeah.
Who knows? It just didn't work. Cancer is, quite something. So maybe cancer is just stronger than that. But then over the course of a few weeks, she noticed that these pains and aches were a moving of her spinal orientation. So she
Oh.
adjusted her spine. It's like there was something that was like, yeah, chances are the mushrooms kind of told her brain to adjust the spine,
Mhm.
but she didn't have a readout of that. There was
Right.
no access to it to verbalize it. There was no access to even just know it for herself. What she
Mhm.
noticed after a while is, oh, as I'm working out, I'm now noticing that one side of my body is a little bit weaker than the other because
Yeah.
I've habitually been not sitting, but
Mhm.
right, like
Yes.
just a little bit.
Yeah.
And over
Uh-huh.
the span of a lifetime, that adds up. So in her daily routine of working out, she was able to correct some of those habitual holding patterns that led to a great level of relief in pain that she's been holding in her body. Perhaps because of that, and perhaps, alongside of those changes, her digestion also improved, and she was able to have regular bowel movements. Now, this is not a showy thing that we will, hear about people bragging. Like, this isn't
Mhm.
sounding as wonderful as,
Uh-huh.
I connected with the cosmos and I saw beautiful colors. But to this person, having regular bowel movements have made it so much easier to tolerate the treatments,
Oh,
the
yeah. Mhm.
really impactful,
Right.
the chemotherapy, the
Mhm.
radiation treatments. It has
Right.
eased her daily experience. And so,
Yeah.
despite the fact that her cancer was not cured by this treatment, no, she didn't have these great, amazing insights that
Mhm.
are brag worthy in a way. She
Mhm.
also reported, you know, perhaps because of these changes or because of something else, but my depression lifted. And even though I still have pain in my life, and even though I'm still dealing with potentially I'm not going to survive this disease, I actually look forward to every day. I feel better, and I
Yeah.
can't describe it in ways that make sense on any kind of
Right.
measurable scale.
Yeah.
So that's,
And
you
this is
know,
it's so important. It's like the I don't want to say deep learning, but it's like the whole thinking about a question, and then like a lot of geniuses out there in history would go to take a nap and have the answer come to them in the nap. And that's not unlike, I mean, even Edison would take and hold a metal ball and lay down, and then the moment he was about to fall asleep, he would take a nap and his hand would get loose and he would drop the ball and it would wake him up, and he wouldn't, so he would go back to work after that. And he would take these tactful naps to get inspiration and to solve problems in his higher mind without thinking about it. And I think that, again, our languages can vary and our values can vary and our weights and all of this and the way we determine that vary. So if someone in your therapy session describes what you did, that is just as much a success as it would be if it had a rational explanation for the success. And it's such a powerful, moving thing like that. I mean, we've seen this with, massage therapy, where you better drink some water because this is going to let a lot of scar tissue out into your blood and you might get sick from it. You might even get sick to your stomach, and lactic acid can do that. And scar tissue is amazing. It holds so many things in place. And so when someone goes through something like that, it's marvelous because it's the unexpected result. Like, it wasn't what they thought. It wasn't this thing. All of a sudden, though, this very basic thing that really matters is helping them have a higher value, quality of life along the way, and less pain, and ability to approach that already arduous task. It's like it's already
Mhm.
hard enough. And so to me, that is just an ultimate meter. There's your meter right there, is the person feeling the result. Didn't Now look, I'll say this. You've had people that blindfold themselves during these sessions while you paint, and they talk to family members in their past who've passed away, perhaps. I think you've helped people, and then instead of blindfolding themselves, maybe they play music, they play
Mhm.
guitar or something. You've had people do this. I know that anything creative that you would want to do to like have your mind occupied or something to fixate on helps. And have you ever had anyone else paint at the same time you did, or do
No,
write, people do anything like that? You will one day. I'm sure you'll have that
so
come forward.
some of it is also just the
Uh,
impact on your motor skills. It seems
mhm,
like for example, a lot of people wanted to play their guitars,
mhm.
but not everyone was able to.
Yeah, that's
So
funny
it's
how that
a
goes,
different kind of
right? Yeah.
flow that you enter. So
Uh-huh.
some of it is like the person who played the longest in my sessions so far is a mechanical engineer specializing in, a lot of very distinct like machine building routines.
Uh-huh.
He's also luthier, meaning like he
Oh,
makes
wow. They're
music.
everything about the
So
instrument.
this is somebody who for whom the physical component of
Mhm.
playing the guitar is absolutely negligible. That might be just as easy as drawing a breath.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
it
Yeah. Yeah.
didn't require any additional processing. So for him, the feature of that experience was, oh, I'm letting go. I'm not obsessing over getting every tone just right. And he was able to improvise, and he was
Oh,
able to,
yeah.
jam in a
Uh-huh.
way that he otherwise finds very difficult to do because he's a
Right.
person who's sort of chases perfection, you
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
conventional
That's
sense.
right.
And they're
That's right.
able to just let it flow through him.
Mm.
The people who are more in touch with that flowing state might struggle because then, the processing power necessary to remember how to play the chord,
Right,
how
right.
to tune their instruments in the moment is overwhelming, and it becomes,
Uh-huh.
an obstacle to what it is that they're actually working through.
Right.
But that's the thing, we're all very different. And
Mhm.
a lot of times the differences that we actually hold are not even within our own awareness.
Uh-huh. The
They're,
shared
they're
cultural.
just somewhere in
Yeah.
there, and we
Uh-huh.
will say, like, for example, like everybody, I work with a person like on their trip day, they're with me for about 10 to 12 hours usually, even though the trip itself is like 6 to 7 hours, but we
Mhm.
spent a lot of time together. But I do spend many hours with them the day before, and I do spend many hours with them the day after. So we
Yeah.
have a lot of intensive time together, and
Yeah.
I know that.
Exactly.
And
Uh-huh.
almost everyone will speak about their eating, for example, the same
Mm.
way. But let me tell you that everyone is different. So when
Mm.
I ask, like, so tell me about your food, most people will say, I eat normal stuff. I am absolutely average.
What is
Okay?
that these days?
What is that?
What is normal? Uh-huh. Yeah.
What is
Y-
normal?
Yeah.
Completely different things to
Here we
people.
go. Right. Right. And
So they'll
so,
say, I eat healthy. What is
uh-huh. Yeah, and it brings people back to their bodies. I mean, for people out there who've never experienced anything like this, I mean, it brings you to the precipice of a physiological state in which that a lot of times that once you break through that, then you start having this discovery. And it's a deeper, more engaging discovery mode approach, I feel like. And you're facilitating something so important, which is to allow people to play in their senses and ideas in a way that is, well, for one, they're coming in with the intent of working on something. Some people are looking for a new idea or they're looking for a breakthrough. Some people have come to me for music and they want to get better. They're already good, but they want to get better and they need that next breakthrough. Some people come for vocabulary and they need more expressional language to work with. There are different reasons for different people. And for each, even if they have the same reasons, they're going to have different ways of getting to it, different values that help weigh the approach and time that out. Form, accuracy, speed, power, wash, rinse, repeat. And you alleviate the complexities of the worry and the environment. You minimize that. I'd like to admit that, or say to everyone, that your therapy sessions are all indoors. They are strictly indoors, as this also is a zoning issue if you were to take that outdoors. But it's also better to keep it controlled for a lot of people who aren't initiated into this, who are not aware. Have you had repeat clients who come back for other sessions? Okay, all right. So how does that go typically? Or is there anything even typical about that? Like, what would you say if you've seen that's been good with
So
that? What do you notice?
it is easier when people come back because we already have an established relationship. Because
Hmm.
again, that's my bias. I believe that having an established trust
Hmm.
helps with that surrender. Ultimately, psychedelics regress a person. So you go into a much younger space inside of you, and not having to track the outside, not having to track your own physiological, functions, and the trust
Hmm.
goes into the relationship, like, oh, she's got me, I already know this.
Hmm.
um it helps, so they're oftentimes able to surrender a little bit more. At the same time, every trip really is different. um and I'm not really seeing that, a particular mushroom will have this particular effect. There's a lot of that, in the wild. People will say,
Right.
well, this type of mushroom will give you great visuals, and this type of mushroom will make you feel really warm-hearted. It
Hmm.
depends. It doesn't
Really
necessarily
does.
be true. Um, so it depends on what walks in the door. It's not just the person, it's their
Uh-huh.
context.
Yeah.
It's, everything. It's what they
Uh-huh.
were thinking, what they were just thinking, the person
Hmm.
they talked to, the clothes
Hmm.
that they're wearing. It's that entirety that is so difficult to grasp in something that's reducible into, bullet points.
Right,
So
right. Yeah,
you
it falls into the average. You can't let it do that. It's just to be exemplified. And I mean, this is again, discovery mode is such an important state of mind, and that we can share ideas and discover the perspectives behind them and not be so attached to the ideas themselves. Maybe
Mhm.
attach ourselves to the value that we have in other people and not an
Mhm.
argument. And the goals that we really have, if are they are as simple as discovery and exploration, are some of the most living and sustainable things that we can promote amongst ourselves and through science. A friggin' book club, okay? A rock and gem show. People cooking together. The neural networks we build as communities, and the inside joke of all of that culture, that subculture, that art and music community, that community of dancers, that community of scientists. So those hackers that are trying to build a device to save kids in another country that's like limited resources or whatever. For what it's worth, we all have our different callings. We all have our similarities, and whether we project or we exemplify that, or whether we promote that or we condemn that, it's choice. And it's important that we choose something that's positive out of all of this, to not obsess over the smallest end of things, to not nitpick, to not split hairs over this, okay? Even barbers don't split hairs, they cut them, okay? So don't forget the forest, okay? Lest you be one of the trees yourself. You're really well founded in what you've got. Your approach is amazing, Jeanette. You have probably one of the best, well-rounded approaches I've ever seen for something like this. You hear stories out there about people doing ceremonies in South America with different things like iboga, other things like that, and it's a huge process. For different things. There are different reasons they have to do that, and I can't think of a safer way of having a breakthrough like this in self-discovery, especially for, again, trauma, body issues. I can't, nothing, no, there's not one thing that's for everybody except food, water, and oxygen. Okay. I can safely say that food, water, and oxygen are for everybody. Okay. But things like this aren't for everybody. And it's important to see that the people that normally wouldn't have access to it do have access because of the way you do what you do.
Mhm.
You can't run around preaching about this stuff. There's no evangelism behind this. That would be dangerous. This is a matter of, I am a fan of this, would even be dangerous to say. Like, I support this type of therapy. Its efficacy is noteworthy. It drives value for the patient. It lends itself to lasting effects. I am not taking someone else's word for it.
Mhm.
And you know, this is a vast and exciting territory to look into, but it really, again, finding a way to help people hold the mirror up to themselves is what you're doing. And in some
Mhm.
cases, you're helping them hold the mirror up to their bodies. You're helping them process which they cannot understand in some ways. You don't
Mhm.
have to understand what it is you ate or why it's messing with your stomach, as long as you process it and get it through with. Okay. There is no need to, again, nitpick these things and understand them to the nth degree. We are limited, and there's nothing absolute about any law or supposition of what we think facts are or findings. This is the safest way to go about it, is to say, I don't know, I'd like to, and that's okay not to, but
Mhm.
I don't always think I do. And even if I think I do, it's limited. And I can accept that as my definition for knowing something. But anyway, I value the contrast you provide and what you're doing. I know that all of your clients do. I love the success stories. I love the difficult stories. I love the odd stories that are hard to pin down. I love hearing musicians having problems playing after a while and deciding to just focus on, what's next. And you being flexible, it takes a hardy spirit. It takes a robust soul to do that. If you weren't doing art, what would you be doing, or music? What would you be doing? You might have to be writing or something. It would be. I think it's so natural to have an artist doing something around. It's just so natural. It's a court, uh what do you call it, sort of environment, like a court, like here's performers and here's royalty or whatever. It's just that attitude of like, oh, here's something going on. It's not obtrusive, and it's artistic. it's
Mhm.
it's it's full of life, what you do. So there are no other questions today. Any other statements from anybody? I don't see any other hands. So I think we've done a fine job of getting these points across today. So anyway, Look, if anyone has any questions beyond this, you can always feel free to reach out to the show at aithinktankpodcast.com. And Jeanette, I know I'm going to be putting your links and things up, but I'm going to drop some links in the chat right now, really quick for everyone. So lucidcradle.com, I'm going to put that in the Zoom chat right now, and you can check that out and take a look at some of her work. I highly recommend the book. Let's see here. So, in Lucid Color, which is also on Amazon. I'm gonna go ahead and put that in here right now. I bought it on Kindle because I didn't have time to wait, and I really wanted to soak it up as quick as I could. So I really wanted that hardcover, or I really wanted the physical book too, because it's beautiful. So, but there's so much great art and printing in here as well. This is the stuff that really impresses me, the real artisanal, special ink, special paper, special grass used in blending it all together, and just amazing. But thank you for doing what you do and helping others the way you do. You're a rare spirit out there, and I hope that you gain more traction and with more people, and also write more books and maybe help other people get into this around the world as this becomes more available and acceptable where people are based on their laws and whatnot. So, but do you have any closing notes or any thoughts or feelings you'd like to leave everybody with before we call it a day here?
Thank you so much for hosting me here, for giving me an opportunity to speak with you about all of these
Mhm.
really big topics. I feel
Yeah.
like we really just got to scratch the surface. There is so
Mhm.
much more that can be said, so much more that can be explored. And what I
Mhm.
really hope that everyone takes away from this conversation is more curiosity and inspiration to look at what they believe. They don't have to agree with me or, pardon, even with you.
That's right.
It's
That's right.
really it's about starting a conversation. It's about coming together and remembering that, we are more when we combine our forces, our own thoughts.
Yes.
And feelings.
Yes.
So
Uh-huh.
thank you so much for getting this conversation started.
Absolutely. This is the highlight of my year right now, to have this, and for years and years and years and decades of thinking about this and reading different things and seeing this come to fruition, and all the Western medicine and the new, more modern tools of measurement, and uh, we're finding a lot of things that are just so exciting that we're going to circle back on, and it's going to be different when we do. Okay. So, thank you so much. This is Jeanette Small with Lucid Cradle in Bend, Oregon. And you can check out her website that I dropped in the chat for everybody. Do check out that book. It's amazing. It's a phenomenal read, full of wonderful inspirational stories, cases, and art. And thank you, Michael Larson, for also coming and talking with us. We do appreciate it, man. I hope to see you again. We need to be buddies, so you get up with me on LinkedIn or however here. So, but again, thank you so much, everybody, for coming out. This is the 14th episode of the AI Think Tank podcast. I am your host, Dan Wilson, coming to you from Seattle, Washington. And so, Jeanette Small, thanks again for your time, for everything. To everybody out there, have a wonderful Saturday, a great weekend, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks, and bye, everybody.